All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to try out the chat box on the right-hand side, that would be helpful. So we've got some exciting content for you guys from Tamron. We've got the art of travel photography and storytelling. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to go through a little bit of presentation for a while, and then feel free to ask questions, of course, during the presentation, but we're going to have sort of a dedicated Q&A time at the end, and Erica is going to answer all of your questions that you have. We also have Sarah from Tamron here in the chat box, and between Sarah and I, we're going to help you with any questions you may have during your presentation. Otherwise, Erica is definitely going to get to those questions at the end. So sit back and relax. And thanks again for joining us today. And Erica is going to take it away.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bryn. Thank you, Sarah, of course, your wonderful sales rep in the area. Thank you guys all for being with me today. As Bryn said, my name is Erica Robinson, and I am a national tech rep with Tamron USA. Normally, that means that I get to travel to each and every one of you to be teaching these classes in person, and I know we'll be doing that sometime soon. Unfortunately, we just don't get to do that quite yet. So I hope wherever you are that you are safe and happy and enjoying some time with your families. I know the other day in my class, I had people from all over the world joining me. I had two people in from Portugal, someone in from Quebec, from all over the States. So I guess one of the really great things about doing these kind of live and the internet is that I get to kind of connect with people from everywhere. So that's been really, really nice. Before we get started, I do want to mention some savings for you guys. Specifically for Precision Camera for the next 5 days, you can get an extra $25 to $50 off select Tamron lenses on top of the national savings. This is only good for those of you who attend this webinar, though, so it is special to you guys, and you have to take advantage of it within the next 5 days. So be sure to check in with your sales staff at your store, or I know that your store is open, so you're welcome to go into the store as well, but definitely take advantage of that. So now that that has been said and you know a little bit about me, we're going to kind of jump right into it. Today, we are going to talk about the art of travel and storytelling. And I think this class is probably one of my ultimate favorite classes to teach, and just to talk about, to have interactions with people about. But if you are new to travel and storytelling, I'm really looking forward to you guys kind of thinking outside of the box and getting into something new. This is a really, really great time now that we have to, now that a lot of us are still home and still technically quarantining, some of us, it's great to be really thinking about a new genre of photography. Or with all creatives, what's really cool is that I've been seeing a lot of photographers doing some form of other art. So painting or sculpting, or really just kind of getting their creative juices flowing. So I think that that's pretty cool. So I'm glad that you guys are taking advantage of the time that you have now to perfect your craft or to try something new. So that's pretty great. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about the art of travel and storytelling. And make sure this is moving here. Okay, great. If you get anything out of this presentation, even if it's just one thing that you hear from me over the next hour, I hope it's that you simply are inspired. You're inspired to photograph more. You're inspired to try something new. You're inspired to learn from another photographer, maybe, or that you've heard about this other photographer you didn't know about from before, and now they have a whole lot of wonderful information to offer you. I know that now, even myself, I'm jumping into a lot of other webinars so that I can, again, keep my creative juices flowing, and I'm gonna put a list of photographers up here in a little while so that you can see some of the photographers that I follow specifically within this genre. Travel and storytelling is something that I'm really, really passionate about. So there's some people that, again, I follow. I'm not copying their images. I'm not taking their information off the internet. I'm simply learning from them. So it's really nice to have all of these interactions now to be inspired to grow in my craft. So if anything, I hope that you get that one main thing from this today. So within travel and within our travel photography, when we're out there on a new adventure, we encounter all different types of scenarios. We encounter landscapes, wildlife, macro, street photography, environmental portraits. We kind of have to adapt to everything as travel photographers. So that means we kind of have to understand each of these pieces, each of these genres, and kind of mush them all into one, right? So normally, if we were in class, I would make you guys raise your hand and tell me what type of photographer you guys are. But we're going to run through a few here and maybe kind of come up with some names here. So if you guys want to type into the chat box when we're talking about specific genres of photography, maybe someone that you follow in particular. So we'll start here and talk about those landscape photographers to start. So who out there can not only considers themselves a landscape photographer, but who follows someone in particular. Throw out some names of people that you follow. Franz Linting, okay, great. Stephen Shore, excellent. I see some names in there. Ansel Adams, of course, the late great Ansel Adams. We all want to be Ansel Adams. Liam Wong, William Patino. Great, these are some names that I don't even know. Annie Strickland, yes, absolutely. Wonderful. So these are all amazing people to think about and to follow along, to kind of learn from their perspective what they see in a situation. Because especially with a landscape, all of us, let's see, how many of us, all 50 of us, right? We could go out into one scenario, one scene all together, and we could all photograph completely differently, right? All of our images, we're going to have a different perspective. We're going to be using different lenses. We're all going to see this scene very, very differently. So what's great about following along with these other names and these other photographers that you may not know is that you'll see that scene differently. And that's a great thing. Okay. So next on my list here, wildlife photographers. All right. Who out there not only considers himself a wildlife photographer, but throw me out some names of wildlife photographers. Oh, and yes, I see Jim Richardson about his Scotland work with Nat Geo. Yes, for landscape photographers out there, Jim Richardson is incredible. So definitely take a look at his work. Yes, okay, Mangelson, of course. I see his galleries all over the place. Kitty Kono, Moose Peterson, yes. Who else do we got out there? So one of my favorites, for those of you who don't know, Joel Sartori. Joel Sartori is an incredible wildlife photographer who has been working on a now over a decade-long project photographing all endangered species, all endangered wildlife, in hopes that it will bring to light their endangerment and hope that we can rehabilitate situations in the future, or just know that this is what happened to this creature. So Joel Sartori is a wonderful person to follow. I also follow Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin, both not only incredible wildlife photographers, but really do some incredible work for the Conservation Society. So that was Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin. Take a look at them if you have never heard of them. So again, wildlife photography, another kind of piece to our puzzle there when it comes to travel photography. Okay, next up, macro, right? Who out there considers themselves a macro photographer or knows some macro photographers that they follow, that they could throw some names out there that other people might be interested in? You're welcome to throw them in the chat box. People can follow along. I follow, let's see, who do I follow? Aha, my coworker. I'm going to throw her right under the bus. So Jillian Bell, my amazing coworker, is an incredible macro photographer. You can find her at Bell Tamron online. She's taught me a lot about macro. Mike Moats, yes, Mike Moats is another one I follow. He's actually a Tamron representative as well, and he does these little things called macro landscapes, which I find really intriguing. So instead of using a strict macro lens, he actually uses things like our 16 to 300 or our 18 to 400, the all-in-one lenses, and creates some really beautiful little landscapes from his macro scenes. Instead of just getting in that full one-to-one, he finds these beautiful little scenes and creates landscapes. So he's a really great one to follow. So next up on my list here, street photography or documentary photography, more on the journalism side of things. This is kind of the side that I gravitate to within my body of work and within my photography. So if you have anyone that you want to throw out there, Alex Soth, yes, Sarah, for sure. I know he's one of your favorites. COVID photography. I wonder, is there a group? I'm sure that there's plenty of groups out there. Cartier Brenson, okay. Let's see, I have some that I follow in particular. Two of my favorite female photographers out there are Deanne Fitzmaurice and Amy Vitale. They are, I think, two of the best photographers out there currently. Not only are they incredible photographers, but they're incredible storytellers and documenters, and they're just doing amazing things for the world. So if you haven't heard of them, definitely take a look at Deanne Fitzmaurice or Amy Vitale. And then later on in the presentation, I'll have a little clip here of some other people that I follow as well. So thank you for jumping in on that with me. I know that those are lots of names for sure. And I hope you find somebody new out there that you want to follow and be inspired by, because there are some wonderful photographers out there. So, all right. So I want to, before we kind of jump into specific travel and storytelling and how we do that, I want to talk about how we build an image, okay? And I kind of think of this as like a puzzle almost. We are building our image like puzzle pieces, and we're using all of these things like focal points, leading lines, scale, perspective, angles, reflections, and framing, all those things that I have written there, plus more, to really make our images unique to us. Because we could have a technically perfect photo, we could expose it properly, we could use our complete exposure triangle, aperture, shutter speed, ISO to make a perfect image, they call it. But if it has no oomph to it, if it has no kind of depth, what is your viewer going to have to be excited by? What are they going to want to look at your image for? And those are all things that we can control within little things like composition, with figuring out our focal point, leading lines, and all of these pieces, again, that I kind of see like puzzle pieces to creating our singular image, okay? So first up on that list here, focal point, right? Sounds really, really simple, and it is. Focal point is exactly that. It is the main point in our image where we, as the photographer, are telling our viewer to look. We are showing them, okay, this is exactly where your eye is supposed to go as soon as you see this image. Whether it's online or in print, let's say you're opening up a book, you open up to that page and you see this photo, your focal point should be the first place that your viewer goes to. And how we get to our focal point is a lot of times by leading lines, by these things, these lines that move our viewer's eye directly into our focal point. They move our viewer's eye then throughout the frame so that they can get a good understanding of what's going on in that image, right? So in this case, yes, our leading lines are man-made, but leading lines don't always have to be man-made. There is no rule saying they have to be. Leading lines can be made out of movement. In this case, we have all of this kind of these really beautiful reeds at the bottom moving. So we see them all moving right back to the horizon line back there. Leading lines can also be made out of course, light and shadow. And there's also no rule saying that you have to just have one leading line. We talk about kind of all these, I guess what we call rules in photography, right? But I hate using the word rule. I like thinking of them as guidelines. Guidelines to help us create better photos, but there's no rule that's necessarily a hard set and fast rule saying you have to do this to create this photo. The most beautiful thing about photography is that we get to think outside the box, is that we get to create as artists and think about how we're piecing together our images to get across a message, right? So there aren't necessarily rules, just guidelines helping us to create. And in this case, when it comes to our leading lines, we definitely have more than one. If you look over on the right, of course, we have the path there leading back to my subjects on the top right. And then we have all the shadows off to the left from all the old footprints moving up the sand there. And then, of course, the fence right along the horizon line. So we have all of these lines moving our viewer's eye directly into our silhouetted subject back there. So again, leading lines, you don't have to just have one. Next up on that composition list is our perspective. Now, a lot of times people will hate when I tell them this, and I'm really sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but sometimes you have to lay on the ground to get the photo that you're trying to get. You have to change up your perspective. If you simply walk up to a scene, take a quick picture, turn around and walk away, you've then lost all of the opportunity that that scene has to offer you. There is so much more that you can get out of a singular scene when you spend some time with it. And when you think about using different angles and perspectives to create a new way of viewing it, to create a new way of looking at it for your viewer. I know that a lot of times when we're out, in national parks, and we expect to be the only tourist in the park, and I hate to break it to you, that's never going to happen. But a lot of times you can kind of tell the tourist from the photographer, because the tourist does just kind of walk up, take a quick picture, and turn around and walk away. And that's okay. They're just capturing a memory for themselves, and that's wonderful. Having the opportunity as photographers now to have everything in our phone is great. But then on the other side, you'll see the photographer in some absolutely ridiculous position trying to create this image. And you don't know what they're doing, but the image 90% of the time looks incredible because it's a different way of looking at that scene. So I definitely strongly urge you to think outside the box with your perspectives. And in this case, don't lay in a puddle like I did. It's just no fun. And I hope you have someone to help you get back up, but think about new perspectives. And lastly on my list here for composition is scale. I think scale is oftentimes the piece to our composition puzzle that we forget the most. And I think the reason that is because we are, as the photographer, we are there. We are in we're in that situation, right? We can see how big or how small a space is. We can see how big or how small a subject is. We smell the smells, we feel the feels, we know exactly what's going on in that scenario, but our viewer does not. So in this scene, I was out at Great Sand Dunes National Park, and it was my first time there a couple years ago. I loved it, but I was having a really hard time at first, really capturing just the grandness of these indeed great sand dunes. I wasn't really thinking outside of the box, and I was just kind of photographing straight forward. I was only photographing just the dunes, and that's great. But the second I added a little bit of understanding of measurement, so if you look on the top right corner there, you can see some people actually trekking right across the top of the dunes, and they really help a viewer understand how big this situation indeed is, because they look so tiny. In any situation, let's say you're a macro photographer, right? If you're a macro photographer and you're out photographing a specific bug, if they're on top of a flower, or if you are a macro photographer and you're documenting coins, you put a ruler next to that coin. Anything that's going to help your viewer understand measurement a little bit better will help them grasp the idea of scale of the scene that you're indeed looking at. So just a little tip for your composition to help. So in this next kind of set here, I have, I think, 5 slides here that I'm going to scroll through. I do want us to think about those puzzle pieces and think about how we are creating that singular image. I know it does sound that we're kind of, I guess, overthinking it in a sense, but a lot of times you're doing these things subconsciously, and you don't realize that you're doing them whatsoever. But when we think about our scene here and thinking about our focal point, thinking about the leading lines and breaking it down through rule of thirds, thinking about our reflections and our framing and pulling all of these different pieces into one image, it will just take our image further. It will give it a bit more life. So I do urge you to think about all of those pieces and take your time with your photography. I know I'm one to talk. I definitely rush through a lot of situations, but when you have the chance, take the time to really enjoy those photos. So now that brings me to something that I know that I've already said, but I think does need to be reiterated sometimes, and that is not walking away from your scene. So I have 4 images here that I'm going to show you, all from the same scene, all taken within about a 45-minute kind of time frame. And they all led really to a very, very different scene and a very different view. Within 45 minutes, a lot can change. Your subject can change. Your light is most drastically going to change. And maybe your just overall view of that situation and that scene and whatever that scene has to tell in its story has to offer. So it's going to change. I do suggest that you spend a little time with it. This scene here, I was waiting. I was in LA, so just outside of LA on the beach, and I was waiting for my coworker to show up. And of course, I had my camera gear with me, and I noticed this guy ride up onto the beach, and he rode up on the sand in like a mountain bike. It wasn't, or no, it was like a road bike, right? And road bike tires, as you know, are really skinny and not great. You would think that you would need a mountain bike or such to drive up on or to ride up onto the sand. So I was curious about what was going on. I just started to take a few pictures, and a couple minutes later, he scared away all of the seagulls that were there. So it created a little bit more of an interesting scene. So as I started taking photos, these seagulls kind of filled in all of that negative space that was up there, and created more of an elaborate scene for my viewer to look at. A couple of minutes later, there was a surfer, a young girl about my age, who came out of the water, and she sat relatively near me in my space. So we started talking, and I tell her how I used to surf back in the day a long time ago, and I miss it. I haven't done it in a while. And so she starts telling me about her surfboard. So we're joking around. I grab her surfboard, and I have her surfboard on top of my head. I'm actually facing the city, which is behind us. And I realized that there's a really beautiful reflection of the city in the top of her surfboard. So knowing my scene here and knowing the camera equipment that I have with me, I grab my 15 to 30 and I turn back towards the water, towards the scene. And I now have a completely different scene than what I shot just a couple of minutes ago. The light has changed. The idea of the photograph has changed because I'm not just directly photographing the scene anymore. I'm creating a bit more of a layered image, right? And yes, the seagull back there is real. I did not Photoshop that seagull in. Sometimes there is just luck that happens in your photos, and take it when it happens. So yes, the seagull is real. So a couple of minutes later, well, I'd say maybe this is 20 or 25 minutes, 20 or 25 minutes goes by, and the girl and I are still chatting, and she's interested in the photos that I'm taking. So I'm showing those to her and teaching her a little bit about them. And the sun really starts to get drastic. So I ask her, now that we've kind of developed this relationship and, there's no, we've broken down that barrier so she doesn't have to fear me or anything like that. I asked her if she wouldn't mind go posing for a photo. So I sent her down to the lifeguard shacks there, had her stand right in between. And since there really wasn't any nice white puffy clouds to create a nice sunset, I just used the color and I put the sun right behind that lifeguard shack and just had the color beaming behind it. So it created, again, a drastically different image from that very first kind of boring photograph, I think we can all say that, that I was just out there kind of joking around with and taking a few images with. So when you spend time with your scene, it will really help you see it on different levels. And I know, of course, that is really hard when we're out there traveling with family or with friends. Tough part is most of the time they don't want to stick around for 45 minutes when we're out there at our sunset. so I suggest maybe they can go to dinner and we can meet up with them after, or I've started traveling with a lot of other photographers so that I can be with those like-minded individuals who want to either spend 45 minutes at this one place or create this sunset, whatever it is. I think that there's, again, a lot that your scene has to offer you. So moving on here, this slide here I know has a lot of words, so I won't make you read all of them, but you are welcome to take a quick screenshot of it. These are not mine. This is full transparency here. I took this from a National Geographic magazine quite a few years back, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and it just really resonated with me. Really what it's saying here, so I'll read you a little section. Whatever kind of landscape you are shooting, and this goes for more than just landscapes, for everything, think about what the essential qualities are, not just the visual ones. Think about how the place makes you feel and what type of emotions it stirs in you. And then look for ways to get those qualities and feelings onto film. If it's a rocky, violent, wave-washed coast or a bright and sandy one, or if it's the former, you want to show those waves crashing into the shore, probably in stormy weather, versus blue sky and sunlight are probably more appropriate for the later, unless you're there to show the desolation of a resort beach in winter. So I know those are a lot of words, and usually if we were in class, I would make you try and tell me what that means. But since I can't pick on you guys right now, I'll just tell you, what I kind of took from that is that I want to get to know my scene as best I can. I want to portray that scene as it wants to be told, and not in a way that makes it look like it's not its true self, if that makes sense. So in this next kind of couple of images here, these are indeed both mountainscapes, right? We have right on the right, I'm actually in a peak in Norway called Galdhøpiggen, about 8,500 feet up. And on the left, we are in the Grand Tetons National Park. They offer two very vastly different feels and emotions. And what I wanted to do was really make sure that I showed the depth of that I showed what that scene wanted to tell me, instead of just, let's say on the right-hand side with Galdhøpiggen, with that peak, if I had made that kind of nice and warm and goldeny in a sense, it wouldn't necessarily have given off the same feel, wouldn't have had the same emotion. And on the left, same thing. If I had made that kind of cold and created it to the opposite of its potential, it wouldn't have showed me the same feelings, the same ideas. And I want to make sure that I am consistently giving my viewer a good understanding of the place or the person, of the thing that I'm photographing. So think about that a little bit. And if you did take a quick screenshot of that, I encourage you to kind of read into it a little bit more and think about everything that your scene has to offer you. So of course, we are now going to get into a bit of storytelling, and I threw up the definition of storytelling here just so that you had some words to kind of go by. But again, I think that a lot in photography, there's not necessarily rules, there are guidelines. There are things to help us enhance our thought process and the way that we're trying to create. But if we all had rules, we would photograph the exact same thing all the time, and it would be pretty boring. So I encourage all of us to think outside of the box and outside of those rules to really create. So what is storytelling? Storytelling in photographic practice, visual storytelling, is often called a photo essay or a photo story. It's a way for a photographer to narrate a story with a series of photographs. Now, I'm going to put up here next, we're going to talk about singular images versus multiple images, because they can offer very different outcomes, right? Very different stories. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But before we do that, I want to talk about why we storytell. I know that for me, there is something inside of me, this little fire that burns, that just wants to tell people stories. And I don't think, or places stories, excuse me, people, places, things, whatever that may be, I want to tell those stories. But I don't think I realized that that's what I want to do until I started realizing that I wasn't I wasn't photographing necessarily just for myself anymore. I was photographing for that person, that place, or that thing so that I could get out their story. And in my head, I want to make sure that they know that they are just as important as anybody else, or that place is just as important as any other place, that they have a story to tell. So, why we do it? We do it because it brings topics to light, whether good, bad, or indifferent, or on any subject. There is my aunt continually reminds me that there is no lack of stories to be told. Every little tiny story matters. So we tell stories to bring a very specific topic to surface, to light. Why? Because it gives voices to those who haven't been heard. And I recently rephrased this little section in here because I was listening to one of my favorite photographers, a gentleman named Patrick Brown, who is an Australian photographer who works on some of the most intense stories in the world. He is probably one of the most humble, genuine people I've ever met. And he's incredibly quiet. And you would never know by speaking with him the intense topics that he teaches about and that he shares stories about. So if you take a look at his website, please be warned that some images are very intense. Rated R in a sense, I guess, if we want to rate things, but they're incredible, incredible photos. And he shares some amazing stories that do need to be brought to light. But one of the things he said, because we talk about all the time, we share stories for something that doesn't have a voice so that they can, they're voiceless and we want them to be heard. But a lot of times things aren't necessarily voiceless. It's just that people don't want to hear it. And that really resonated with me because I think that there are a lot of stories out there that that are being told, but that sometimes people don't want to hear. And that can be on anything. That can be humanitarian issues, global environmental issues, animal rights, human rights, all of these different things. There are so much to think about. But another reason for why we storytell is to give a voice to those who haven't been heard. Another reason is to create human connections. With a lot of the people that I've photographed out there and anywhere around the world, I've still connected with them over all of this time. Whether it's through social media, whether it's Instagram and Facebook or somewhere, or just an email or phone number or anything, we've still stayed in contact. And that at least makes me know that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm making human connections with people. And I think that with all of those connections, they also can trust in other photographers in the future, that there is, that there are good photographers out there, that we're not simply taking pictures, that we are making images and that we are sharing stories and that their story should be heard. So I do think that creating genuine human connection is important both for us as the photographer and for the subject that we're photographing. And yes, I see the question in there. The photographer I was talking about was Patrick Brown. Yes, he's an Australian photographer. I'll see if at the end I can pull up his Instagram. I think it's just Patrick Brown photo. But if we get to the end, remind me if you don't mind, and I will find his Instagram for you. And lastly, why we storytell. We do storytell a lot of times for us. It allows us to get out of our comfort zone and to grow and to share, and to really, again, think outside of that box. So I know for me, I never want to stop learning. I never want to stop growing. I never want to stop continuing in my craft. And it's just this little tiny fire that burns, that I can't seem to ever put out. So these are all really great reasons for why we storytell. So just a couple of examples talking about each of those pieces so that, you didn't have to stare at a typed out screen there. Thinking about why we storytell for a place that needs to have its voice heard. This is out here in Southern California. I live in San Diego and I moved up here a couple of years ago. And last year I learned about the poppy season. There are these beautiful, beautiful orange poppies that bloom a very specific time of the year, and they just cover these fields. They're absolutely beautiful. They are the California state flower from what I know, and you guys are totally welcome to correct me on that. I am not a botanist. I will fully admit that. But The California poppy is a beautiful flower. And so of course I wanted to go see them bloom. So I went out to go take some photos, and I was really kind of disappointed in not the place, but the humans, and how everyone was just simply trampling over everything. And there were signs posted everywhere. You can see here, this one, that the area was closed. Please do not enter, and take care of our poppies. They'll thank us. But there were so many people doing such, and you could see, you know, the little kind of patches that had been, I guess, sat on, where people have just continued to sit in this one place over and over again. So that little patch now has no poppies. And so this image here, I just wanted to create something to show, you know, these beautiful poppies, but it's very straightforward. There's a sign there, and anytime you have writing in an image, our eyes are naturally going to gravitate and read that sign wherever it is, whether it's on the top right corner, bottom left, dead center. Anytime you have writing in your photo, your viewer's eyes will naturally gravitate there on purpose. So I kept that in there so that it was very straightforward and you could see exactly what was going on. Another great reason for why we storytell is to get a little bit deeper into those layers of, you know, talking about a place and sharing a story of a place. This is out in Havana, Cuba. I'm lucky enough that I get to travel there a couple times a year. And I now have wonderful friends that I call family out there that have supported my photography, and I absolutely adore them. But something that I've learned over time going there is this saying called 2 + 2 = 5. And if you can see on the right hand corner there, and a little bit of graffiti that's kind of faded now, you can see 2 + 2 = 5. This is created by a Cuban street artist, graffiti artist, basically saying something is just not right here. As we all know, mathematically, again, I'm not a mathematician, but 2 + 2 indeed does not equal 5, it equals 4. So 2 + 2 = 5 is explaining that something is just not right here, and that there's more to this place. There's more to understand, there's more to think about, there's more to learn, and there's a lot more growing that it has to do. And for those of you who have been to Cuba and who have met the wonderful people there, the reason I now call them family is because they have taken me in as family, because they accept everything else about visitors coming in to visit their beautiful country and learn about them and spend some time with them. And the reason I found this image really compelling was not only because of the 2 + 2 = 5, but because of its location. So this is right on the Melicon wall. And if we're reading more in depth into this, the Melicon is a very special place for all Cubans, but it's generational into how they view it. So there are some generations who see the ocean as a barrier and as a separator, and who long to leave, who long to get out. So it is this separator, right? But today, if you go down to the Melicon wall, you'll see all sorts of younger people hanging out on their phones, having dates, just enjoying some evening time hanging out on the Melicon wall. So it's a really beautiful place for them to be, and they genuinely enjoy the sea. So there's lots of different ways to view the Melicon, to view the ocean, to view all of this, and to really think about Cuba. So again, it's just another way for us to learn about why we storytell. Why we storytell when it comes to people's connection. As I mentioned, a lot of the people that I have photographed in the past, I'm still in contact with. This is a gentleman named Jerry, who him and I still keep in touch all the time. I actually had this published in a magazine, and I'm in the process of sending him the magazine to thank him for letting me photograph him. But I was out on the West Coast here, out in Oregon, and I was photographing a shipwreck that's out there, the Peter Iredale shipwreck. Little did I know that late at night, when it's low tide, the beach, the entire beach basically becomes a highway that you can literally drive up and down the beach. And the After a while of me being out there photographing, there was this gentleman who drove by in his truck. Turns out it was Jerry. He parks and walks over and asks me what in the world I was doing in the middle of the beach while they're trying to clam, while they're trying to fish. I said, well, I didn't know that this was a highway at night. I just came out here to photograph the shipwreck. So he starts teaching me about the highway rules and all these kinds of things, and about the clams that he was catching and all of this. He asked me if I wanted to photograph the clams. I said, yeah, absolutely, but I'm going to take an environmental portrait and you're going to be in it too. So I created a little bit of a portrait here with him and his clams and his tools and everything. And to this day, it's actually one of my favorite photographs. So it turns out that we can create some really great human connections just by having a conversation and breaking down those barriers. Okay. So as promised, I have a little list here of some of the people that I follow, that I genuinely admire, that I think you guys can get a lot of techniques and learning from, and just sharing stories. Amy Vitale and Deanne Fitzmaurice, two of my favorites, absolutely. Lindsay Addario, who is a brilliant photographer. She is a war photojournalist and has done some amazing work over the years. David Scott Holloway, who's a great friend of mine and also a wonderful, wonderful photographer. He was Anthony Bourdain's photographer. Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin, both incredible conservation photographers and photojournalists, both also doing some amazing work now. And I think you can actually sign up to win a trip with Christina. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but there is information out there for a new workshop that she's putting together, so definitely check on her. And Tyler Workin, who's actually a wedding photographer, but he's part of the Fearless Photographers group and association. And his work when it comes to weddings and how he views them is I think, brilliant. So take a look at him. He also offers some really wonderful workshops. I've taken one of his workshops a long time ago. And it was very intense, but he's so great at what he does. So I appreciate his work as well. So now, while we have a few minutes left, we are going to talk about the types of images, or the types of whether we're doing single image stories or multiple image stories, because they will offer a very different outcome of the story that you're trying to tell, of the information that you're trying to put out there. Single images have to be very powerful. They have to be intense and convey a message all in one image. Okay, whereas your multiple image stories are like chapters in a book. You are creating a photo essay or photo story where it still has to have an arch, almost just like you're reading a story. You start with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have intense parts, you have low parts, you have different areas, again, just like you're reading a book from beginning, middle to end, right? And how we do those things, there's lots of ways we do those things, but I have a couple of tips for you. First and foremost, you do your research. Whether you are going to photograph a specific person or a specific place or a specific animal, some wildlife. Let's say you're out there doing a conservation story on a specific bird, right? If you get out there in June, but its migration was in April, you're going to be really sad, when you can't see the actual migration. So please do your research. Next up, don't be afraid to fail. And I know that it's easier said than done, but all the greats have failed multiple times, probably. Amy Vitale, I've been listening to a lot of her workshops lately, and one of the things that she explains a lot and that she repeats over and over again is to keep pursuing, if you've been rejected on a photo story, if you've been denied on that photo story, whatever it is, keep trying. Don't be afraid to fail, because at one point it will pay off. Controlling your composition. We talked about earlier how to think about those little puzzle pieces and control our composition. Think about how we're condensing down our frame. Do we need to show more of that scene? Do we need to show less of that scene? Cropping is going to become your best friend, and cropping is going to become very special to you, because there are going to be some instances where you where you need that whole entire frame. And there are other instances where you get back and you realize you just needed this little section, and a tiny crop can go a really long way. Next up, we think about our lighting. We do not have photography without lighting. It only exists because of light. So if we don't think about where the light is at the right time, we may not be creating as compelling images as we could be because the light wasn't right. So think about where our lighting is. And lastly, we give our project time. I've spent on certain projects, I've spent years on projects, months on project, days on projects. Joel Sartori, who I mentioned in the beginning, working on his photo art project, he's been working on that for over a decade. And it wasn't actually even accepted into National Geographic until years into the project. So you need to spend time on your projects in order for them to develop life. And in order for them to really appreciate them, you have to appreciate them yourself, okay? Talk to people. So how we photo story, how we story tell, how we create these images, and how we develop relationships is only by talking to people. Some people want to be talked to and others don't, and that's okay. If you walk up to somebody and ask to take their photograph and they say no, that's okay. You just move on to the next person, or you move on to the next story. It didn't hurt anyone, right? So we talk to people. And again, I know that that's easier said than done. But when you, let's say, another big piece of advice here is to give someone a compliment. When you are interested in approaching them for a photograph, compliment them, right? Oh, I love your hat. Oh, I love your shoes. Oh, I think I have those same glasses. Whatever it may be, people love compliments. If you walk up to somebody and say they look like garbage that day, it's really not going to help your story in any way. They're not going to let you take their photograph, basically. So give someone a compliment. And I think that'll go a really long way. And so I've found this more and more. So thinking about spending time with our images and spending time with our subjects, a lot of times our camera can sometimes be viewed as a threat. Sometimes it's just really intense for people because maybe they see photographers all the time, right? In this case, this is a gentleman named Peter that owns one of the biggest cigar shops out in Cayocho and Little Havana in Miami. And he sees photographers and tourists all the time. So when I walked into his cigar shop, I didn't have my camera out. I kept my camera in my bag. And I didn't I knew that I wanted to photograph. I knew that I wanted to kind of create a little visual here. But I didn't do that right away. I actually spent some time in the shop and talked to one of his colleagues. And I learned about some of the cigars in the shop. And then afterwards, I took my camera out and I started taking some pictures of the scene and of the different cigars in there, but not of any of the people. And then I actually left and I said, I'll be back in a little while. I actually think I'm going to buy some cigars. So I left. I went to the park nearby and started making some pictures down there. I came back about 45 minutes to an hour later. He was still at his shop and I had my camera in hand. And I started taking some more pictures and I bought some cigars. I'm not saying you have to buy something from every place that you go, but it definitely helped in my situation because then I could talk to them a little bit longer and I got a great gift out of it. So after a few minutes of talking to him, I realized that he had Hebrew written on his left forearm. My family is from Israel and I've done projects in Israel, so I recognized the writing. And I was just curious, so I asked him, so why would an awesome Cuban guy in Miami, Florida have Hebrew written on his arm? Can you tell me? And so he started telling me that he's actually opening one of the first cigar shops in Israel because of some really great soil that they have in a specific place. So we started chatting and I thought that was great. And then of course I asked him if I could create some photos and he let me into his story. So it's a way of breaking down barriers by not using your camera necessarily as a threat. And in this case, this wouldn't have worked for any sort of street photography when you're moving quickly and you're just taking a quick picture and you're moving by. But in this case, I wanted to develop more of a relationship with him. And in doing so, now every time I go back down to Miami, I can bring my students into class and we can photograph and he'll do cigar rolling classes for us and everything. And it develops more relationships for the future. So I've been doing that a lot lately, and I strongly recommend you do so as well. So thinking about our single images here, and now I'd say I probably have maybe 10 or 15 slides left, so I might run a couple minutes over your mark here, but I'll try and move quickly. But thinking about single images, our single images need to be powerful. Our single images need to convey a message all in one image without having other images to support it and without other images to tell that story. In this case, I was out in Iceland and I wanted to show the just incredible dramatic winds and the storm that we had had that day. And as I was taking pictures, as I was creating images, I was just actually photographing the scene and the landscape, which was great, but not until I added people into my frame, the kind of only few people that were out there that day, did it then add a little bit more drama and a little bit more scale for my viewer to really understand the intensity of that storm. And actually our truck tent, so we had a tent on the top of our roof that day, that blew right off the tent, or right off the roof of the truck, off into the Icelandic wilderness. Pillows and blankets are gone, so hopefully they'll be found one day. But it was a really intense storm, so I wanted to make sure that I conveyed that message. And then for a while, I was photographing abandoned places. I was photographing places with this kind of really visually kind of ugly space, but I found their history to be really beautiful. And this image, out of all the images that I took over those like 10 years that I did this is one that still sits with me quite a bit, because of all the shapes, but more because of the light. The light cascades right there on the front of all of those cleaning supplies, but everything about this place is dirty and falling apart and broken. So I wanted to convey that message all in one image. So I kept that light kind of beaming right onto the cleaning supplies so that it was very straightforward and people knew exactly what was going on. And now I kind of want to share with you a story about creating a series and how we go about something like that. So as I mentioned in the beginning, when we're talking about storytelling, in our photo stories, in our narratives, we generally have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I find actually I have a terrible habit of not knowing when a story ends, because I find myself still pursuing stories for a very, very long time. But in this case, this short story here has a very, very great beginning, middle, and end. I introduce my scene in the beginning. This is a place called Bombay Beach out by the Salton Sea in California. And if those of you who have been there and know this place, it is it's basically it's a fake sea. It's a fake ocean. So it's a sea that's drying up. It's called Bombay Beach in the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is drying up because it's literally in the middle of the desert, and it was created by accident when the Colorado River was diverted, and a piece of it basically broke, and it created this fake sea. So now there's a little town out there called Bombay Beach, and this opening scene kind of tells you a lot about the place. There's very clearly not a lot of people. It is dry, it is kind of falling apart, but the people there are absolute characters, and they will welcome you in for sure. I actually was out there for a workshop with Deanne Fitzmaurice, and my subject that I was planning on photographing was absolutely nowhere to be found the day that I showed up. So I needed to find a new subject. So I simply drove up and down like the 20 streets this town has, first thing in the morning, and I waited till I found some people. These guys were playing football in the middle of the street, so I got out of my car and I took a couple of pictures, and once they kind of noticed I was there, I walked up and I said, "Hey, my name is Erica. I'm here for a photo project and a photo story, and I need a subject to photograph for the next couple of days. Would either of you be willing to be my subject?" And the guy on the right there, his name was Jack. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Hell yeah, girl, let's go." I said, "All right, great." So now I have my subject. So as I started hanging out with Jack for the day, he tells me that he is actually the local plumber. no pun intended, when it comes to his name and plumbing and all these things. My brother-in-law's a plumber, so he'd be really upset if I crack jokes. But he turned out to be the plumber of the town. Not only that, but he did the construction and the electrical work and everything. He was literally a jack of all trades, and a really, really nice guy. So I started following him around for the day and just understanding more about him and more about his work. He was incredibly friendly, and I just got a good vibe knowing that I was safe and I was in an okay place, and that my photo story was going to continue, that it wasn't just going to end here. So my first part of the story just starts out as introducing my scene and my subject and knowing a little bit more about him and what he does. If you notice in the first couple of images there, I didn't even show his face until the fourth image so that we could know what our subject does before we actually meet him. But halfway through the day, he says, well, why don't you come back? You can come back to our new house, and I'll introduce you to Steffi. I'll introduce you to my wife. I said, great, there's a wife involved. This is awesome. So I went back and met Steffi, his wife, who was super kind. Turns out she used to model way back in the day, and so she was all about having her photo taken, which was wonderful. And I still keep in contact with them through Facebook. They're both just absolutely lovely people to be around. So as I started kind of hanging out with them for the day, in their backyard, they have these like picnic benches and things, and everything about their life is colorful. And I wanted this now to be a story about the two of them and not just about Jack, because throughout the entire day, Jack is telling me about his wife and how much he loves her, and how they moved out to Bombay Beach from LA because of some issues that they had gotten into with drugs, and they needed a change of lifestyle, a change of pace. So they both moved out to Bombay Beach. Jack loves to paint, so he was showing me the things that he paints. And I noticed that he had Steph written on his ring finger. So I wanted to make sure to bring that in as a detail, because it then shows the connection that my two characters have, and that they're not just friends, or they're not just, living together, whatever that this may be, that they are very connected on a very deep level. So then I wanted to make sure that I brought their space into my story so that they could see, my viewer could really get an understanding of the way of life of my characters and how bright and exciting they are. And then I ended my story with a portrait of the two of them. I asked if I could take their portrait, and they sat right down on the couch and posed for a couple of photos for me. And before they posed, this was actually the first photo that I took of them right when they sat down. And I just love seeing the admiration that they have in their eyes for each other. And so my photo story started out as a story just about Jack, and ended up more as a love story and an understanding of a relationship. So it has what we call that arch, just like when you're reading a book. It has the beginning, the middle, and end, and all the arches in between to keep our viewer interested. So I think I'm almost finished up. My last slide here with some tips. Do your research, be patient, practice, and be prepared. All things that are really going to help you create amazing stories in the future. This information here, this is me. You can find me as Tamron Tech Erica, both on Facebook and Instagram. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm happy to just chat if you have any comments, or if you just want to follow along on the story and the journey. Please feel free to do so. Don't forget to take advantage of the extra savings on any Tamron lenses. You have an extra $25 to $50 off on specific lenses for the next 5 days. So definitely be in touch with your local camera store and salespeople so that they can help you with that. Sarah is your local sales rep for Tamron in your store. So if you have any questions for her, I know that you can find her online as well as Sarah with Tamron. And thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you stay safe and well, and I will connect with you on the road sometime very, very soon. Bye, guys.